Howard Easterbrook had built $300 million out of nothing, and he could not remember the last time anyone had told him the truth. That was the thought that kept surfacing on the drive home from the gala, the way a splinter works its way to the surface of skin, no matter how deep it's buried. He was 61 years old. Sitting in the back of a town car that smelled faintly of leather conditioner, watching the lights of downtown Calgary slide past the window. And he was thinking about how every person at that dinner had agreed with everything he'd said for 2.5 hours straight. So Howard decided to find out if honesty still existed anywhere in this city, or if he'd simply forgotten what it looked like. Hello, friends, and welcome back. Before we get into today's story, give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got some powerful ones coming up this month. And tell me in the comments, where in Canada are you watching from tonight? Vancouver, Toronto, Halifax, somewhere out on the prairies? We love hearing from all of you. Now get comfortable, because this story is one that's going to sit with you. Howard Easterbrook had grown up in a row house in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. In a neighborhood where the wind came off the water cold enough to crack your knuckles, and where his mother, a woman named Florence, had raised him and his younger sister alone, after his father drowned on a fishing boat that went down 40 kilometers off the coast when Howard was 9 years old. Florence cleaned offices at night. She came home smelling of industrial floor wax and slept 4 hours before her shift at the cannery started. She never once complained, and she never once let Howard or his sister go a single day without knowing they were loved. Even when the cupboards were close to bare, Howard built his fortune in logistics, trucking, then freight rail contracts, then a shipping consultancy that ended up handling cargo routes across half the country. By the time he was 50, his name was attached to terminals in 3 provinces. He owned a house on the edge of Calgary with a view of the Rockies that visitors always stopped to photograph. 11 rooms for one man who ate breakfast alone every single morning at a table built for 14. There had been a wife once. Her name was Renata, and for the better part of 9 years, Howard believed she loved the man underneath the money, not the money itself. He told her things he'd never told another living soul. About the night his mother sat the 2 children down and explained, without crying, that their father wasn't coming home. About the winters when Florence wore the same wool coat for 11 years because a new one meant a week without groceries. He gave Renata everything he had, the soft parts too, and when the marriage ended, his lawyers discovered she had been quietly moving funds into accounts under her cousin's name for over 2 years. Close to $1.6 million. Howard didn't fight it in public. He signed what needed signing and let her go, and something in him closed that night, not violently, just the way a door closes when someone has decided, very calmly, that it will not be opened again. There had been a business partner too, years before that, a man named Desmond he'd known since they were boys delivering newspapers together in the Cape Breton cold. When Desmond needed $180,000 to launch a fleet of delivery vans, Howard wrote the check without a contract because Desmond was the closest thing to a brother he had. 4 months later, the vans were sold off, the company folded, and Desmond simply stopped answering his phone. No explanation, no apology. Just silence, the kind that tells you everything you're afraid to hear. After that, Howard Easterbrook stopped trusting people. Not loudly. Quietly, the way the most dangerous things happen. It was a Friday evening when the idea came to him. On the drive home from that gala, where everyone had agreed with him for 2.5 hours, the car stopped at a red light near a busy intersection downtown, and Howard watched through the window as a man hurrying along the sidewalk dropped something from his coat pocket without noticing. A wallet, brown leather, skidding slightly against the concrete. 3 people walked past it. A woman on her phone glanced down and kept moving. A young man with earbuds in stepped clean over it like it was a crack in the pavement. An older man slowed, looked left and right, and walked on without touching it. Then a kid appeared. Maybe 12, hauling a hockey equipment bag that was too big for him, clearly headed somewhere late. He saw the wallet, picked it up, opened it, and then ran. Not away, but after the man who'd dropped it. He caught him at the corner, tugged his sleeve, held the wallet out. The man snatched it without a word of thanks, checked the cash was still there, and kept walking like nothing had happened. The boy stood there a second, then turned around, hitched his hockey bag back over his shoulder, and kept walking the other way. Howard sat very still in the back seat. The light turned green. The car moved. He did not. That kid had nothing to gain. No one had been watching, except, as it turned out, a tired man in a town car who couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of the night, lying awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling of a bedroom too big for one person. By morning, Howard had a plan. He would build a test. A wallet, his own, an old leather bifold worn soft at the corners. With $2,000 in cash, 2 credit cards, and one more thing tucked into the inside flap. A small photograph, edges curled and yellowed, of a boy standing in front of a row house with his mother's hand resting on his shoulder. The boy was smiling. The woman beside him was not, because she was too tired to, though her hand on his shoulder was steady, the grip of someone who has decided not to let go of something, even when everything else keeps slipping. That boy was Howard. That woman was Florence. He chose a Saturday on a busy stretch near a shopping plaza on the city's northeast side. Dressed in a plain jacket and jeans, nothing that would mark him as anyone in particular. His assistant, a quiet young woman named Priya, stood half a block off with her phone recording, without drawing attention. The first woman to come across the wallet was named, well, it doesn't matter what she was called, because she barely registered it. Mid-30s, business blazer, phone pressed to her ear, mid-sentence about a client meeting. Her eyes caught the wallet on the pavement for half a second and moved on without her feet ever slowing. Howard picked it up, walked a block, and dropped it again. The second woman was standing at a coffee cart, sorting change in her palm. The wallet landed near her boot. She looked down, picked it up, opened it, found the cash, counted it with her eyes. 20 hundreds. Looked left, looked right, one long careful sweep each way, then folded the wallet shut and slid it into her bag. She adjusted her shoulder strap and walked off without a backward glance. Howard watched from across the street. His face gave away nothing. He picked up a third wallet, identical contents, same photograph, and walked 3 blocks further to a quieter stretch near a discount grocery store, and dropped it there. That was where he saw her. She was walking slowly, not by choice, because the small boy holding her hand had short legs and a habit of stopping to examine every interesting thing on the sidewalk. A crow on a fence post, a dog tied up outside a shop, a dandelion pushing up through a crack in the concrete. Her name, which Howard would not learn until later, was Deborah Whitlock. She was 34 years old, carrying a plastic grocery bag worn thin at the handles, wearing a fleece jacket gone soft and shapeless at the collar from too many washes, and a pair of running shoes that had clearly been good shoes once. The left one had split near the toe, mended with a strip of duct tape that had started to peel. The wallet landed on the sidewalk 4 feet ahead of her. Her son nearly tripped over it. "Mom, what's that?" His name was Calvin. He pointed at the wallet with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old who has discovered something important. Deborah stopped, let go of his hand for a moment, and bent to pick it up. It was heavier than she expected. Good leather. She opened it. The cash hit her first. $200 bills, fanned slightly. $2,000. Her lips parted. She didn't move for a moment. $2,000 was more than she cleared in 5 weeks at the call center. $2,000 was the overdue notice sitting on her kitchen counter with the red stamp on it. $2,000 was new boots for Calvin, whose toes had been pressing against the front of his sneakers for 2 months because she kept telling herself one more paycheck, just one more. She looked at the money. She looked at Calvin, who was now crouched examining an ant on the sidewalk, oblivious. She looked at the money again. Then her fingers moved past the bills, past the cards, into the small inside pocket where they found the photograph. A boy in front of a row house, a tired woman with her hand on his shoulder. The photo had been folded once, long ago, and the crease had worn pale and thin. the way it does when something has been carried and looked at for years. This wasn't a photograph that had been forgotten. This was a photograph that lived in that wallet. Deborah closed it. She didn't think about what $2,000 could buy. She thought about who had lost it, and about the boy in the picture, and the woman who looked like she'd never once put herself first. She thought, briefly and without meaning to, about how that row house in the photo looked a little like the building she'd grown up in back in Sydney, Nova Scotia, before she'd moved out west. She took Calvin's hand and began walking. Not away. Forward. Looking. She did not know that the man who dropped it was standing 50 meters behind her. She did not know she was being tested. She only knew one thing, the way her own mother had taught her to know it without question. This wasn't hers, and someone, somewhere, was missing it. Deborah Whitlock had not always been this tired. There had been a time, not even that long ago, when she was a girl with skinned knees running the halls of a low-rise apartment building in Sydney, in a household held together by her mother, Anne, who worked as a school cafeteria cook and came home every evening with whatever hadn't been served that day. A Tupperware of macaroni, sometimes just bread, and a thermos of soup. Anne would sit across from Deborah and her younger brother at the kitchen table and watch them eat without touching a bite herself, always saying she'd already eaten at the school. Deborah believed that until she was 13. Anne had a saying, the kind a mother repeats so many times it becomes load-bearing in a child's mind. We don't take what isn't ours, not even when we're hungry, especially when we're hungry. She said at the time Deborah found a $20 bill on the floor of the laundromat and wanted to pocket it. She said at the time the landlord undercharged them by $60, and Anne went and corrected it herself because she wasn't sure it was a mistake and didn't want to take advantage of one if it was. That was Anne, a woman who carried her honesty close, the way other people carried a wallet, even when it cost her. Deborah was 20 when she lost her. A heart attack, sudden, in the school kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. By the time Deborah got there from her part-time job at the drugstore, still in her work apron, it was over. She remembered the fluorescent hum of the hospital hallway. She would always remember that hum. After the funeral, everything reorganized itself the way it does when the person holding the center is gone. Deborah moved out west to Calgary for work that never quite materialized into what she'd hoped, got by on hospitality jobs, and then a call center position, met a man named Wesley who told her, with his whole chest, that he was staying. Calvin was born 8 months after Wesley left a note on the kitchen table and never came back. The phone number he'd given her stopped working within a week. Now Deborah was 34, working days at the call center, and 2 evening shifts a week, stocking shelves at a grocery store on the other side of town, dropping Calvin at a subsidized daycare run out of a church basement at 7 each morning and picking him up at 6 each night. The rent was 3 weeks behind. The hydro bill had a red notice on it. The fridge held milk, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and not much else. And there were the shoes. The runners with the duct tape over the split toe, bought 2 years earlier for $34 at a discount store, worn down by 2 winters of bus stops and grocery aisles, and standing on a concrete floor all shift. Every time she thought about replacing them, the math started. $34 was 2 weeks of milk, was the gap between paying the hydro on time or not. So the shoes stayed, and she adjusted her walk just slightly to favor the good side of her left foot. A habit so practiced it had become invisible to her. Those shoes were the ledger of every small thing she'd given up so Calvin wouldn't have to. And somewhere underneath all of it, Anne's voice still lived, steady as a pulse. We don't take what isn't ours, especially when we're hungry. Deborah walked the block with the wallet in one hand and Calvin's fingers in the other, stopping strangers. A man with a coffee cup shook his head. A woman at a crosswalk had no idea. A teenager scrolling his phone barely looked up. "Mom, can we go home?" "I'm cold," Calvin said, tugging her sleeve. "Just a little more, bud. Somebody's missing this." She tried a bakery near the end of the block, asked the young man behind the counter if anyone had come in asking about a lost wallet, brown leather, some cash inside. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, nobody." She thanked him and sat down at one of the little metal tables outside with Calvin, who climbed up and put his head down on the table, his legs swinging. She opened the wallet again and looked at the photograph more closely this time. A boy of about 10 in front of a row house with a mother's hand on his shoulder. Tired woman. Firm grip. Something in Deborah recognized that posture without being able to name it. She did not know that the boy in the photograph was standing 30 meters away, watching her. That he'd seen her pick up the wallet and close it without taking a cent. That he'd watched her walk up and down the block, asking strangers a question that cost her nothing to ask and everything to mean. That he'd seen her shoes. Howard stepped away from the storefront where he'd been standing and crossed toward her. Something behind his ribs had shifted, like a stone settling into a new position after years of pressing in the same place. Deborah saw him coming, stood up, lifted Calvin onto her hip. "Excuse me, is this yours?" Howard looked at the wallet, then at her, then, without quite meaning to, at her shoes, then back to her eyes, steady and dark and entirely without performance. "Yes," he said, "it is." She handed it over and offered him a small, tired smile. "Glad I found you." The photo inside looked important. She adjusted Calvin on her hip, turned and walked off. Howard stood on the sidewalk and opened the wallet. The cash was untouched, the cards untouched. The photograph still in the inside pocket, exactly where he'd placed it. She had nothing, and she took nothing. He drove home that evening in silence. No radio, no calls. Just the city sliding past the windows, and a quiet, persistent thought he didn't yet have words for. He did not eat the dinner left covered on the kitchen counter. He went straight to his study, set the wallet on the desk, and opened it to the photograph. He'd carried that photo for over 30 years, but he looked at his mother's face that night differently than he ever had. Florence Easterbrook. Hands always chapped from cold water, shoes always worn through before she'd admit it. A woman who scrubbed other people's offices for half her adult life and never once took so much as a stapler home. Even when it would have been so easy, even when nobody would have known. He picked up the phone and called Priya. "The third woman today. Find out who she is." By 9 the next morning there was a file on his desk. Deborah Whitlock, 34, single mother, 1 son, age 5. 2 jobs, rent 3 weeks behind, no family in the city. He read it the way he read contracts, slowly, missing nothing. But this wasn't a contract. This was a life reduced to a page, and every line said the same thing. She had almost nothing. He thought about the woman who'd walked past the wallet without seeing it. He didn't blame her. Some people are sleepless on their feet. That's not a crime. He thought about the woman who'd taken the cash. He understood the arithmetic of being broke better than most people would ever guess. He wasn't angry at either of them. He was just tired. Tired of being right about people. Tired of a story he'd told himself for 30 years that had calcified into the only story he knew how to tell. People take, that's what people do. And if you're foolish enough to trust them, that's on you. But Deborah Whitlock hadn't taken. Deborah, who needed that money more than the other two combined, who had a kid on her hip and a red notice on her hydro bill and a hole in her shoe, had held $2,000 in her hands and walked up a city block asking strangers if they'd lost something. She had proven him wrong, and being wrong had never felt so much like relief. 3 days later, Howard pulled out of his garage, not in the Range Rover, not in the Mercedes, but in a 2004 Honda Civic, silver, with a long scratch down the passenger door he'd never bothered fixing, the first car he'd ever bought himself. He drove across the city, past the towers downtown, past the neighborhoods where the lawns got wider, and then past the point where everything reversed, and the buildings got older and the paint got thinner. Deborah's building was a low rise on the corner, no elevator, the entryway propped open with a cinder block. He climbed 3 flights, a television murmuring behind one door, a child's bike with one missing pedal leaning in a stairwell, and knocked on apartment 3B. Deborah opened the door in her work polo, hair pulled back, the particular exhaustion in her face that comes from years of insufficient sleep stacked on top of itself. She blinked. "You're the man with the wallet." "I am," Howard said. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I was hoping I could talk to you for a minute." She glanced past him into the hallway, then back, then stepped aside. "Come in." He entered the small apartment carefully, the way a tall man learns to make himself smaller in tight spaces. A framed photo on a shelf, a pair of small rubber boots by the door, picture books stacked beside a worn couch. Calvin appeared from the hallway, studied Howard with enormous undecided eyes. "Are you Mom's friend?" Deborah answered before Howard could. "He's someone I helped the other day, Bud. Go play for a bit." She filled a kettle, took down 2 mugs that didn't match, one chipped at the rim, one with a faded floral pattern, and dropped a tea bag in each. Howard looked at those mugs and had to grip the edge of the table. His mother had made tea in cups exactly like that, every morning in a kitchen not unlike this one. She set a mug in front of him and sat down across the small table, waiting, unhurried, comfortable with silence in a way most people aren't. "I need to tell you something," Howard said. "I didn't lose that wallet by accident." Deborah's mug stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly and looked at him. He told her all of it. The gala, the boy with the hockey bag, the sleepless night. The 3 women. The woman who walked past, the woman who took the cash, standing 50 meters back watching strangers answer a question they didn't know they were being asked. When he finished, the kitchen went very quiet. The warmth that had been in her face cooled, like a window closing on a sunny day. "So you tested people," she said. Her voice was level, careful. "I didn't return that wallet to pass a test," she went on before he could answer. "I returned it because it wasn't mine." The sentence landed in the room like something heavy set down on a table. Howard opened his mouth, then closed it. "You're right," he finally said. "And I'm sorry." Deborah studied his face for a long moment, the way she'd studied the photograph in the wallet. Not his clothes, not his posture, but his eyes. The way someone who has been hurt learns to recognize hurt in others. "You didn't come here to thank me," she said quietly. "You came here because you needed someone to be honest with you." "I haven't had that in a long time," Howard admitted. Calvin's small footsteps padded down the hall and he appeared in the doorway. "Mom, are we eating dinner soon?" "In a bit, Bud. Go play a few more minutes." Deborah looked back at Howard, and something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of a decision, a door not open but no longer bolted. "I can't be bought," she said, "but I can listen." And then she told him about Anne. Not because he'd asked, but because she could see he needed something real. And the realest thing she had was her mother. She told him about the 4:30 wake-ups, the same worn shoes for years on end, the Tupperware containers of leftovers, the saying repeated like a prayer. She told him about the night Anne collapsed in the school kitchen, about running there still in her apron, about arriving too late and sitting with her mother's hand until it went cold, because leaving would have made it real. "After the funeral, I went through her closet," Deborah said. "It was small. Everything in it was years old. At the bottom, under a folded blanket, there was an envelope." She paused. $310, her whole savings. There was a note in her handwriting. 3 words, "For Deborah's boots." She looked down. "I didn't buy boots. I paid the hydro with it. And I kept wearing the old ones, and I'll keep wearing them until they fall apart completely, because every time I look down, I see her." Howard looked down too, at the duct tape over the split toe, visible in the dim kitchen light. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, and there was nothing worth saying that would be worth more than the silence, so he let it stay. A week passed before Howard made his next move, and when he made it carefully. He called her directly, asked if she'd come to his office the following Tuesday at 10. She asked why. "Because I'd like to show you something properly," he said. She agreed. She arrived 5 minutes late, Calvin pausing twice on the walk from the bus stop to study a fire hydrant and a dog behind a fence. She wore her best blouse, ironed on the kitchen counter because she didn't own an ironing board, and the same shoes. She hadn't tried to borrow a different pair or hide them. That was Deborah. Howard met them at the elevator in a suit with the jacket off and sleeves rolled, and led them into a conference room on the 14th floor with the city spread out below in the morning light. Calvin pressed his face to the glass. "Mom, we're flying." On the table sat three things laid out simply: a shoebox, a small sealed envelope, and a clipped document. "Open it," Howard said, nodding to the box. Inside were a pair of plain new boots, child-sized, beside them a smaller box Deborah hadn't noticed at first. Calvin's size, too. "They're not anything special," Howard said, "but they're from someone who understands what shoes mean to you." Next, the envelope. Deborah opened it and counted. $310. "This is your mother's money," Howard said quietly. "I'm not giving you this. I'm returning it. She saved it for your boots. I just made sure it found its way there." Deborah's hands trembled. She set the bills down very carefully. Last, the document. "This is a position," Howard said. "Community liaison with a foundation I'm starting. It supports single parents in underserved neighborhoods. Housing help, childcare access, job placement, salary, benefits for you and Calvin, hours built around school." He waited until she looked up. "I don't want to give you things, Deborah. I want to give you a chance to do what you already do. See people, really see them, and get paid for it." "Why?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you held $2,000 and all you saw was a photograph of a boy and his mother. That boy was me. And that mother, she would have liked you." Something broke quietly in Deborah then. Tears came, slow and silent, while she sat perfectly straight with her hands flat on the table. "Mom, why are you crying?" Calvin asked, alarmed. She smoothed his hair. "Because someone remembered your grandma, Bud." "Is that good crying or sad crying?" She smiled through it. "Both, baby." "It's both." The weeks that followed rearranged themselves quietly. Deborah started the job, walking into a small office above a pharmacy on the city's northeast side. 3 rooms, a printer that jammed, a phone that rang constantly. Her job was simple to describe and enormous in practice. Find mothers who needed help. Listen, connect them to resources that existed, but hid behind unanswered phone numbers and forms nobody had time to fill out. She was good at it because she'd lived it. She knew the difference between help that makes a person feel seen and help that makes a person feel small. She sat in kitchens that looked like hers had 6 weeks earlier, drank tea from mismatched cups, listened to women say, "We're fine," and heard what they really meant. She wore the new boots to work every day, walking flat-footed, no adjustment, no hiding. Every evening she set them by the door, and on the shelf beside the television sat her mother's photograph next to the old taped-up shoes. Kept not because they were worth anything, but because they were worth remembering. Calvin started at a better daycare with a real playground. The hydro bill stayed current. The fridge was full in the way that mattered. Not overflowing, just enough that tomorrow was taken care of. But the bigger change was smaller than that, harder to see. For the first time in years, Deborah fell asleep without the math running behind her eyes. How much is rent? How many days to payday? Can I make it? The calculation simply stopped, and in its place came something that wasn't quite happiness but stood close enough to it. Howard changed too, though slower, the way heavy things move. He stopped eating breakfast at the long dining table and moved to the small kitchen table near the window, where his housekeeper kept a plant she watered each morning. He began driving the Civic out to the neighborhoods, where the foundation worked, not for meetings, just to sit in waiting rooms and community centers and listen to a world he'd left behind decades earlier. One afternoon at a community center on the northeast side, while Deborah ran a support group behind a closed door, Howard sat in the hallway beside a boy of about 8 working through a math worksheet with a pencil he was gripping like he wanted to throw it across the room. "What are you working on?" "Math. I hate it." Howard almost smiled. Then the almost became real. "Can I see?" They worked through it together for 20 minutes, Howard breaking the numbers into smaller pieces the way his own mother once had at a kitchen table in a building not unlike this one. When he stood to leave, the boy looked up at him with the clear, unguarded trust of a child who hasn't yet learned to be suspicious of kindness. "You're pretty good at this. You should be a teacher." Howard walked out and stood on the sidewalk a long moment, pressing the back of his hand against his eyes before he got in the car. That night, in his study, he took the photograph from his wallet. Florence, himself at 10. the row house, the cracked front step, and set it upright on the corner of his desk where he would see it every morning and every evening. Not a different man, just slowly becoming the one he'd been before the walls went up. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in late October, the foundation opened a small community center on the northeast side. No ribbon, no press, just a renovated building filled with the things that mattered. A tutoring room, a childcare space with soft mats, a kitchen for cooking classes twice a week, a circle of chairs for the support groups. Deborah had been running out of borrowed rooms for months. The block was alive with music from a speaker on the front steps, kids running between adults' legs, a folding table outside loaded with homemade food, a casserole, butter tarts, somebody's grandmother had baked, a sheet cake with blue icing. Deborah stood near the entrance in her boots and a dress she'd bought with her own paycheck, looking at a small plaque mounted just inside the door at eye level. The Ann Whitlock Community Center. She hadn't known. Howard hadn't told her. She reached out and traced the letters with her fingertips. Calvin stood beside her, looking up at it with the serious concentration of a child reading something important. "Mom, that's Grandma's name." She knelt down to his height. "Yeah, Bud, that's Grandma's name. Is Grandma here?" Deborah looked at the plaque, then the building, then the children running through the rooms, the mothers gathered in the doorway, the table of food, the music. "I think she is," she said softly. She stood and saw Howard a few feet away. No suit, hands in his pockets. Something different in his eyes than there had been months earlier in her kitchen. Quieter than happiness. Like a room where someone had finally switched on a light. A little girl ran past and stopped, looking up at Deborah with the directness only a child has. "Miss Deborah, is this place yours?" "It's not mine, sweetheart. It belongs to everyone." The girl considered this with great seriousness, nodded once, and announced, "Well, it's the best place on this whole street," before running off again. Howard stepped up beside Deborah. Not in front, not behind, beside, and they both looked at the plaque, the light falling warm across the letters. "I think she would have liked this place," he said. Deborah's eyes were bright, but not with tears. Something clearer than that. The particular brightness of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and finally found somewhere to set it down. "She would have liked you," Deborah said. Howard was quiet a moment, the breeze carrying the smell of butter tarts across the sidewalk between them. "Tell me about her." Deborah smiled, and it moved through her whole face slowly like light through water. "She would have made you tea in a chipped mug and told you to sit down and stop looking so serious." Howard laughed. Not the careful, measured sound he'd made at galas for 30 years, but something short and surprised and entirely real. And so she told him, and he listened, and for the first time in a very long while, neither one of them was alone.